Hello, I am Deborah Verniz and I am an assistant professor at the University of Missouri. Josette P. Duarte is the Stuckman Chair in Design Innovation and Director of the Stuckman Center for Design Computing at the Pennsylvania State University. Together, we have been working on developing strategies for parametric design applied to affordable housing planning. This presentation is entitled Code Compliance as Barriers to Legalize Informal Settlements, the case of Santa Marta Favela. This presentation is part of a larger research that proposes a framework for the planning of affordable housing based on the settlement model of Brazilian favelas. In this presentation, we analyze how, in our case study, buildings and planning codes are restrictive tools rather than normative when applied to social housing. As an alternative, we show how other valid assessment tools can provide a more holistic evaluation of a specific housing settlement, and we offer suggestions to improve undesirable characteristics in such settlements. This presentation is divided into 5 main parts. In the introduction, we will present the topic of code compliance when we will show how it has been hampering the development of affordable housing in the Brazilian context. In the second part, the Santa Marta Favela, we will introduce the case study of this research, an informal settlement that has been defying local building and planning codes, but that has other urban qualities to offer. These qualities, although important, are not measured, quantified, or regulated by any current building or planning code. In the third part, local codes, we discuss the importance of building regulation and we will show the local planning codes that our case study has to comply to. In the fourth part, housing quality assessment, we will show an alternative and more holistic tool for housing assessment. And in the fifth and last part, we will discuss the results and theorize how the local codes could be more accommodating of different ways of living while still establishing minimum urban and building standards. In Brazil, planning and building codes are approved and reinforced at the municipal level. These codes determine the minimum standards regarding general building dimensions, such as opening for ventilation and minimum construction setbacks. They also provide standards for general urban characteristics, like minimum street width, maximum street inclination, minimum and maximum block dimensions, and so on. The master plan establishes the seat zoning, determining the type of use and other general urban features that each area of the city should present. Any new or remodeled buildings, as well as land developments, should meet the same general standards and have the design approved by the Municipal Bureau before the construction phase starts. Though necessary, rigid and unreasonable standards can make buildings and developments more expensive, resulting in housing that's potentially unaffordable for low-income classes. Often, meeting these standards increases construction costs and leads to low-density indexes, hampering the complete development of the land. Standards found in planning codes, such as lot size, road width, floor space index, maximum ground coverage, and building setbacks, consume land and are used, in many cases, to discourage rural exodus. However, density control and higher housing costs can also limit the quantity of housing available in the formal sector and encourage slum formation. Regarding building codes, the consumption of more materials and land to meet the minimum standards are some of the reasons for the increased costs of production of housing units by specifying minimum dimensions for interior rooms and common areas. Although planning and building codes are established with the best of intentions, they need some flexibility to facilitate the production of affordable housing. The master plan can also be a powerful instrument by defining special zones within the urban area where different standards can be met. Research shows that the rationalization of those codes, without lowering the quality or safety standards, can reduce house construction costs by almost 13%. And decrease land consumption by almost 43%. Such a rationalization offers a better alternative to the current Brazilian paradigm for lowering housing construction costs, which is to build housing in the urban periphery. This decades-old practice though reducing land costs generate other types of costs for the government that needs to expand its urban infrastructure to attend those remote areas and for residents who spend money and time on daily commutes. The Santa Marta Favela is located in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and it is a case study for this research. Favelas are a type of Brazilian informal settlement that emerges from the unmet need for affordable housing as a product of self-construction. These settlements often do not meet building and planning code standards. In Rio de Janeiro, areas intended for affordable housing are qualified as special areas of social interest. These areas include both formal housing settlements that are built by the public power and informal settlements, including but not limited to favelas. The Santa Marta favela is located on Dona Marta Hill, and its occupation started in 1924. There are diverging stories about how the settlement started, but a merging point is that the first houses were built to shelter people who moved into the city and that were working on a construction nearby. The privileged location of the settlement, nearby the downtown area and many touristic attractions, turned it into an attractive location for many people looking for blue-collar work. As you can see from the picture on the right, most buildings are made with durable materials. Houses there are usually built in an incremental way, mostly starting with temporary shacks that are gradually replaced with materials like concrete for the structure and brick and mortar for the walls. The Santa Marta favela is an iconic settlement. It has appeared in national and international movies, video clips, and soap operas. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, Santa Marta became the place where the public power would implement experimental social programs that would later be implemented in other parts of the city and even of the country. There are three main codes that can be applied totally or partially to Santa Marta. The Municipal Law for Urban Land Parceling specifies standards for land parceling in the city, and it also divides the city into zones determining which activities should prevail in each area. The Municipal Building Code specifies minimum standards for building regarding windows for access to daylight and natural ventilation, internal circulation width, and room dimensions, among other features. For affordable housing, the code permits standards lower than its own, which are regulated by specific legislations governing buildings for such purpose. The legislation for the special areas for social interest in Santa Marta favela divides the settlement into subzones and defines building standards for each of them. Regarding the municipal law for land parceling, the first standard is minimum street width. For this standard, local streets must have at least 2 lanes in opposite direction. Each lane should measure a minimum of 3 meters, and the sidewalk must be at least 2.5 meters. If there is any type of obstacle, like a tree, there must be a minimum of 1.5 meter for pedestrian circulation. On the image to the right, we have a plan of the settlement. Santa Marta only has pedestrian circulation and a funicular on the right side of the settlement that takes residents up and down the hill. The only parts of the pedestrian circulation that are in compliance with the minimum width are the 2 portions marked in red. For the next standard, maximum street inclination, the preferred inclination is 6%. However, sections of 100 meter length or less can have an inclination of 8%. There are also special cases with steep slopes where progressive inclination is accepted, when alternating between 25 and 15% inclination for no longer than 100 meters length. Santa Marta does not have streets where cars can drive through. The circulation is narrow, steep, and in some parts with stairs. Most part of the circulation also does not meet the local standards for accessibility, which also limits the maximum sidewalk inclination to 6% for the traffic of wheelchairs and the minimum circulation width of 1.2 meters. In Santa Marta, ramps can have up to 15% of inclination. For the next standard, maximum block length, the code limits it to a maximum length of 200 meters to favor walkability. All blocks in Santa Marta meet this requirement. The largest block in Santa Marta is represented in red on the map, and its bigger length is 78.7 meters. And for the minimum lot size, the code requires that a plot has a minimum area of 125 square meters, with a minimum front alignment of 5 meters. Santa Marta has no plot division. However, if considered that a building occupies the whole area of the plot, only the building in red would attain the minimum standards for plot size. Regarding the municipal building code, the only standard that applies to Santa Marta is the minimum plot setback. Regarding this standard, the building code specifies a minimum setback of 1.5 meters for lateral and back limits and a frontal setback of 5 meters, excluding garages, ramps, and other elements needed for access. Considering the open areas that surround the existing buildings in Santa Marta as potential setbacks to determine a supposed plot division, the condition would be as follows. Buildings in magenta would meet the minimum requirements for lateral and back distance. Buildings in green would meet the minimum front distance requirements, and buildings in cyan would meet all the distance requirements. In blue are the buildings that would meet the setback specifications for lateral and back borders if the limit was lowered from 1.5 meters to 1 meter. The specific legislation for special areas for social interest that regulates construction in Santa Marta divides the settlement into subzones. Subzone A, which is considered a high-risk area that is unsuitable for construction. Subzone B, where building height is limited to 2 floors. And Subzone C, where building height is limited to 3 floors. The code only permits the construction of new buildings if they are initiated by and the responsibility of the public power, and or designated for relocating residents from one area of the settlement to another. Most buildings in Santa Marta exist before this law was passed in 2009 and are grandfathered in. There is little to no reinforcement of this law, and buildings have up to 5 floors. These taller buildings are located mostly on subregions B and C, which are much denser than subregion A due to the characteristics of the terrain. And now we will present a more holistic evaluation method that could be applied to Santa Marta Favela. The Housing Quality Evaluation Method, QARC, was proposed by Pedro to evaluate the architectural quality of housing settlements. The computer implementation of QARC has an interface that works in Microsoft Access environment, and it foresees the assignment of quantitative and qualitative values that correspond to different evaluation criteria. Evaluation results range from 0 to 3, and to classify the results, Pedro proposes a scale that defines 3 levels of performance. Optimum, which means that the neighborhood fully satisfies the daily needs of the residents and the permanent use of spaces by people with disabilities. Recommended, the neighborhood offers different uses for its open spaces and supports the eventual use of the spaces by people with disability. And minimum, which means that the neighborhood satisfies the daily needs of the residents at a minimum level. Scores that are equal or lower than 0.5 are considered unsatisfactory, not attending to the minimum requirements. The criteria considered in the evaluation of Santa Marta were articulation, personalization, pleasantness, safety, and spatial adequacy. Articulation is divided into accessibility and privacy. Personalization is divided into appropriation and adaptability. Pleasantness is related to environmental comfort standards. Safety is subdivided into safety in daily use and protection against robbery. And spatial adequacy is related to the availability of urban furnishing and the existence of open air leisure areas for residents and visitors. After inputting the information about the settlement in the QARC system, the program gives you a score for each criterion with recommendations for improvement. Regarding articulation, Santa Marta scored 1.25, which is minimal. The report with recommendations for improving the settlement includes suggestions on improving walkability of pathways, have better stairways, and improve general accessibility of public areas. Regarding personalization, Santa Marta scored 2.87, optimal. Because this category received a score close to the maximum, which is 3, the report did not make suggestions for improvement. Regarding pleasantness, Santa Marta scored 1.2, which is minimal. The suggestions to improve this criterion were to provide more protection against severe weather, focus on providing good sight views, and protection of public areas against foul smells. Regarding safety, Santa Marta scored 1.51, which is just at the threshold of recommended. The recommendation to improve this criterion include to provide proper fence and guardrails in public areas and to avoid areas with obstructed visibility. And regarding spatial adequacy, Santa Marta scored 0.94, which is minimal. The recommendation to improve this criterion include to provide parking for the residents, at least one per housing unit, and to provide more urban furniture like benches and leisure options for different age brackets. Today, we presented an analysis of the Santa Marta Favela. Local building and planning codes are limited to establish minimum measurements for plots, setbacks, streets, walkways, and blocks. These standards end up reinforcing lower levels of urban density and therefore a higher cost for residents to live in urban areas. These standards do not address other important qualitative features like thermal comfort, access to daylight, or existence of proper open and public areas. By evaluating the favela using the keyword, it is shown that following a more flexible and holistic approach, it is possible to find positive qualities in the settlement and also identify which physical characteristics need to be improved. Local planning standards are important to determine the overall urban characteristics of a city. However, they should not hinder its natural urban development. Informal settlements like favelas are the materialization of an unmet need for housing. Although these settlements do not present ideal urban conditions, deeming them illegal and potentially subject to demolition is a rather drastic measure. The need for more flexible planning and building codes is latent. These flexible codes would allow the construction of more affordable settlements than those permitted by the actual legislation, by giving access to housing within the city limits to the underprivileged population, thus guaranteeing their right to the city. And with the references, we come to the end of this presentation. We will bring details about the evaluation of the Santa Marta Favela in the upcoming full paper for this conference. Thank you for your time.